Welcome everyone to the Brass Fall 2022 Online Symposium. I am Angel Truesdale, the Chair of the Business Reference and Academic Libraries Committee for Brass and the Chair of the Symposia Subcommittee. Thank you to our subcommittee, Christy Cunningham, Brian Garrison, and Christine Pollock. I'm gonna get that right today. Thank you for spending time with Brass and our presenters today. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Brian Garrison, to get us started with this presentation.
Great, thank you, Angel. And thanks for being our fearless leader. So our next presentation is tilting the one-shot using the tilt method to enhance business library instruction. Our presenter is Kayla Davidson from Eastern Kentucky University. I'll be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, Kayla has been so gracious as to want to answer any questions that you may have during the course of the presentation. So please put those in the chat. I'll leap in and make sure they get answered. Take it away, Kayla.
Thank you. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Kayla Davidson, and I am a reference and instruction librarian at Eastern Kentucky University, and I am the liaison to the College of Business and the Department of History. And today I want to talk to you all about TILT, which is Transparency in Learning and Teaching, which I recently began exploring through a faculty development program on campus, and I am now super enthusiastic about TILT. So, what is TILT? TILT is a research-based method of adding transparency to all aspects of teaching and learning. Kudos to Mary Ann Winklemes and her team. They kind of started the research and the foundation for TILT. The focus of TILT is to help students and the instructor understand the whys and the hows of learning. Why are we discussing a particular topic in class? Why are we doing this activity? And why are we doing it in this manner? How will this apply to an upcoming project? And more importantly, to the real world? We as instructors know internally why we planned our lessons and activities the way that we did, but our students don't have that insight. So how often do you find yourself in front of a class, prepped and ready, lesson plan in hand, active learning experiences mapped out, and you look out mid-sentence to a sea of blank, uninterested stares, probably someone in the back asleep. You can just almost hear the thought bubbles going, why is this person talking to me? So TILT can really help to change that because it is about giving students that insight into our thought process and intentions when we create each piece of a lesson or activity. Students know why they're being asked to listen or do something. They know what is expected of them, and they know how it will benefit them. And the beautiful thing about TILT is that it focuses on small, meaningful changes that can be made to existing lessons and assignments. So it's very attainable and manageable to incorporate it into your planning and teaching. Because the goal is not necessarily to recreate or change the lessons and the activities and the goals, but to change how all these are approached and explained to the students and to us standing up as the library instructor. So, what are the benefits of TILT? You get more student engagement. When students know the purpose of what they are doing, you can really increase the student buy-in. They're going to be more engaged, more invested, and more likely to retain the information you're presenting, particularly if you can connect what they are learning not only to the research project coming up, but to their future careers. Something like you will be expected to do this kind of research when creating XYZ reports as a manager. Tell them those things as you are talking to them. I taught a lesson using a tilted lesson plan, and I noticed a lot more focus from the students, more head nodding, more note taking, good level of engagement and productive work when they did their independent activity. I also got more in-depth questions during their work time after the lesson than I usually would. More of the really hard-hitting questions as opposed to, now, what did you say? Where do I click? And there's nothing wrong with those. I forget where to click 5 minutes after someone tells me to, but those are the questions that we live for, those really in-depth ones. Tilt can also really level the playing field for students. It is wonderful for increasing equity and for making lessons more accessible. Making teaching and learning transparent helps to reduce the inequalities in the classroom. Transparent teaching helps remove jargon and assumptions that can put students who are first gen, who might have learning differences, who are non-traditional on a more even ground with their more traditional peers. A lot of the drive behind Tilt is to think about the small things we may not normally consider in our teaching, things like academic or subject jargon that may provide a stumbling block to our students, especially those who might already be at a disadvantage. So making our teaching transparent removes this barrier for everyone. Tilt can also help facilitate transfer of learning. In the College of Business here, there's a lot of emphasis on, I'm sorry, my light is motion censored, but I think you all can still see me okay. If not, let me know. There is a real focus on the importance of skills and knowledge that students can use in the real world. And I assume a lot of you probably have similar philosophies. So by taking just a couple of seconds during your session to make that connection like out loud in your teaching, you can help cement these ideas with students and show them how those skills transfer so they'll take them with them. It will also save you time in the future. So I know it sounds like a little more work on the front end before you walk in to teach that session, and who needs that, right? But by taking those few extra seconds or minutes now to start tilting, it's going to set you up for more success in the future because you have this very transparent lesson plan. And we're going to look at what that looks like in just a little bit. That's going to make it easier every other time you walk into these sessions to know what you're doing. It is easier to teach from a tilted lesson because you make it more transparent for your students and for you. One of the great things about Tilt is that say you wake up one morning very ill and you cannot go into this class. With this very transparent lesson plan, you can hand it off to your amazing coworker who volunteered to walk into that session for you. And they can teach your lesson because you've made it so much easier for them. So Tilt has a lot of applications. It can be applied to teaching, learning, and leadership in higher ed in a lot of different avenues. It's useful in lesson planning and assignment design, in the moment teaching in the classroom, and even in working on committees and groups at the institution. Like I am currently heading up an ad hoc group in our library, and I was kind of struggling with the direction this group should be going. So I used the Tilt method to help reframe the goals and objectives of the group, and that helped me to be a stronger leader for that group. I had a better sense of direction and purpose, and that in turn helped me to make our meetings more meaningful, provide better guidance, and to know what steps we needed to take to move our work forward and why. There are so many applications for Tilt and all that we do, but for this session, we're going to look specifically at lesson planning for the one-shot library instruction. So the three main tenets of Tilt are purpose, task, and criteria. Tilt is purposefully not rigid. Everyone's teaching style is different, our students are different, and we need flexibility and creativity to make our teaching and learning work. So it's not so much a do XYZ, you've tilted your lesson, boom. It is much more flexible and open than that. The focus of Tilt is for each individual to be intentional and think critically about each piece of your lesson and activity, not to have you follow a specific set of rules. There are checklists and rubrics that you can use to help guide you as you're tilting your lesson, and we're going to look at where you can find those and how you can utilize those things. But in the end, it comes down to the focus on your purpose, the tasks, and the criteria. And once you've made all those more transparent, the rest is going to fall into place. So we're going to look at kind of how I went through tilting a lesson plan that I had. So first, the purpose. This is where I really sat down to consider the purpose of this lesson. One of my biggest hangups is trying to cram too much information into my library instruction sessions. I only have 50 minutes with these students, an hour and 15 if I'm really lucky. And I feel like I have to prepare them for every possible eventuality. And in a way that is kind of what we're doing, but not the way that I was going about it. They need skills that they can transfer, not me spitting every database under the sun at them. They just don't need that. And research has shown, and it's in one of the Tilt books that will be at the end of this presentation on the resources slide, that young adults can hold no more than 4 to 5 ideas in short-term working memory. And as a former young adult, I feel like that's quite a generous number, but okay. So me rapid fire trying to run through databases and this trick and this tidbit, that's not helpful to my students. It's cognitive overload to them, and honestly, it's stress and overload to me. So how do I pare down my purpose into the essentials that the students need to know? This is where we're really going to take a look at, why am I standing in front of them? What do they need to actually be successful in this instance and to carry that success forward? I always went into a classroom with a purpose in mind, but I didn't particularly write out goals or objectives the way that you might for a semester-long class or a big assignment, something like that. So this was step 1 in starting to tilt a lesson. What were the objectives for my students? What clear, measurable knowledge and skills did they need to leave that session having? So I wrote those out, and that's what I used to make sure every other piece of the session tied into those. So I already had a skeleton lesson plan, and that's what I used to apply the purpose and later the criteria that we're going to talk about to that plan to build it up and make it more transparent. I actually ended up throwing a few things out of that lesson because they did not serve the purpose. Not that they weren't important or useful, but not to this purpose in this instance. And, I spend this time making this beautiful research guide that's just over here watching me teach going, excuse you, that's why I'm here. You don't need to tell them everything under the sun today. That's why I exist. So once you have the purpose, make sure that's clear, not just for you, but to your students. So this is how we increase the buy-in. Display your objectives and talk them through with your students at the beginning of class. Specify the content, knowledge, and skills they're going to gain, how these connect to, not just to the assignment, but to their course content, to their major, and wherever you can to their lives beyond the classroom and beyond higher ed. In the first lesson I tilted, the students were working on a field report, which is something that they would be doing throughout their careers. So I made sure that they knew that the gathering and evaluating of information that they were doing was along the same lines of what they would be doing in the field. This is setting their foundations. If you can, it's nice to invite the students to participate in designing the agenda for the class. This can be out of comfort zones, but it can be very helpful. It takes a little more prep work for a one-shot, and it's not always practical for a one-shot. It just depends on the class. But it's nice if you can, particularly if you have been kind of working with the students, if you've seen them as freshmen, you're getting them again, and you're building on that to know where they are and how you can move them forward. So creating a quick poll at the beginning of class with a few options for discussion and kind of gauge where they are. So, I might walk into a lesson thinking they really need some info on Business Source Complete and how to utilize that, but they've got that down. They don't need me to talk about that. Maybe I need to talk about IBIS World. Maybe I need to talk about how to find census data. Maybe that's more helpful to them. If it's feasible, it could be really great to get this before the session so you can get that prepped and ready, but that may not always be possible. And finally, spend some time evaluating the progress of through your agenda with the students at the end. Go back over the objectives, explain how those were met, or even better, ask the students to explain to you if they think the objectives were met, and take some time to answer their questions. And if things weren't met, it happens. We've only got 50 minutes. Do an email follow-up, make a quick tutorial, and send that to the instructor so the students can still get that information and clarify any points. And so next is the task. So task is everything that kind of happens within our session. And it's about breaking down each piece of the lesson and making sure those connect to the purpose and the criteria. This is looking not only at what we as the library instructor are doing, but what our students are doing as we are instructing. If they're talking, should the students be taking notes? Should they be following along and navigating a database? Make it clear to them what to do in each part of the lesson. excuse me, they may not realize it's okay to follow along on a laptop or try searching on their phones. So if that's allowed in your classroom, make sure you explicitly state that and alleviate their concern. Looks like we've got a question in the chat.
Yeah, do you work with the professor to help you when tilting these sessions?
I do, yes. Thank you for that question. So before the sessions, I always try to either have an email conversation or a quick Zoom with the professor. And they are very helpful in the purpose and criteria portion. You know, it's what do you want your students to get out of this session? And that is how I base my purpose. And for one instructor, we're going to talk about that session and the criteria. That is where I get my criteria. You know, what should success look like for your students? And that's their criteria for leaving this session. Excuse me. I haven't talked a lot today, so my voice is getting strained. And so when students are independently working, make sure to specify what they should be doing and in what order they should be doing it. What should they do first? What next? And make sure they know when they've succeeded. So I like to have students work independently throughout the lesson to chunk that up and have them work on each piece as we learn it. So for example, we'll discuss creating search terms, and then I have them work on that. And then we learn about actually searching in different resources, and they work on that. Evaluating sources, work on that. And this makes it easier to give small bites of directions and allow students to process and break down their task. And they will even, they'll remember those steps when they are on their own doing this, having it broken down like that for them. This is a great time to add in some how people learn data. Talk about the benefits of active learning. Talk about the research. I'm having you do this assignment this way because data shows that this will help you better retain information. That's a quick thing to do, and it's something we don't even consciously think about sometimes, but just telling that to students, telling them the why of you're asking them to do something is going to be really helpful to them. And then criteria. So this is where my conversations with the instructors come in really handy. What do you want your students to walk out of this room with? How are you going to measure success? How will the students know they have succeeded? And, this can get tricky in a one-shot. We don't assess the way a classroom teacher would. So, this is, again, where the instructor comes in really handy. So the instructor I mentioned earlier, she wanted the students to leave with 2 resources: articles, ebooks, data sets, excuse me, something they could use for their report, and provide her a printout of the citations for those resources. So having something concrete like that to focus on, especially because it was their exit ticket to leave a very hot, stuffy computer lab we were in, really helped the students focus on what they needed. And it also helped me to focus my instruction. So circle back to the point of the lesson. Build your purpose on what your exit criteria are going to be. So this can really, we're getting into backward design, which is really helpful in getting your goals set and making your teaching very intentional, and will also eliminate that need to give too much information. So to help students understand the criteria, give them real world examples. In this case, I walked them through brainstorming keywords, walked them through sample searching, and pulled up an article, and we evaluated it as a class. And always make sure to point out the permalinks. I'm terrible at remembering to point out the permalinks. They need them. This is also a good place to engage students in applying the criteria. So in library instruction, our criteria for success might be something from the framework: evaluating information, articulating search strategies. So these are how we can think about criteria for one-shots and how we can describe that to our students. We can tell them how to evaluate an information source, how to successfully break down a research topic and create and revise searches, and then conduct our evaluation based on this. It'll be a lot of formative evaluation of just having them talk to us, of listening to them as they're working. give them some time to work and offer running commentary as they're doing it. Pay attention to what they're doing and saying, and talk to the whole class about signs of success as you see them and what they should be looking for to know that they are succeeding in what they're doing. One thing I really like to do toward the end of class is to create something such as a Padlet or a Jamboard so that students can share the resources they found. And we talk through the searching and evaluating process so that students can talk about how they applied the skills and knowledge to meet the criteria. And they can see examples of each other's work. And they can also hear their peers talking about the criteria for success and what that looks like, which will kind of click better in their brains sometimes because it's someone who speaks their language a little better than I do talking to them. All right. So now that you've got your lesson ready, you can actually apply tilt directly into your teaching. While you are speaking, take a few extra seconds to highlight the whys. Tell them out loud, why you're talking about something, why this will make a difference in their coursework, in the practice of their careers. Who are you and what benefit can you offer to them? You don't have to be exhaustive in this. We don't want to provide so much detail and chatter that students are overwhelmed. Adapt it to the lesson, to your students, to your own teaching style. As I said before, tilt is not rigid. Use it the way that it benefits you. And take a moment to explain library jargon. This is one thing that I learned very quickly that made me pause and really think about the way I speak to my students. Is so many don't know the word database and what that means. I said it in a class one time and I noticed the funny looks. So I asked the students, raise your hands. How many of you know what this word means? And only a couple raised their hands and they couldn't really explain it. And I realized standing up there on the spot, I know what a database is, but I didn't know how to explain it to these students. So take some time to reflect on the jargon and talk that through with your students in the moment.
Looks like we have another question, Kayla.
Okay.
This person is a little bit concerned about making all these changes in the 15 to 20 minutes of a one-shot. So what are the non-negotiables in a mini session, you think?
Okay. I have never had a session quite that short. 50 minutes is usually the shortest time frame I've been given. I'm so sorry. So the non-negotiables, I would say, are working on the jargon. And I would say making sure that the students understand the objectives of the lesson. So you could talk about those in the first minute really quick, get those out of the way, and make sure that they know what success is going to look like. Does success look like finding a good article? Does success look like walking out with several different search iterations? And make sure they know what success is going to look like for them. Does that help?
Thanks.
Oh.
Yes, I get very short. Like I have literally had to tell people, like, I can't in 10 minutes, like I can only cover one database, or like I can use PowerPoints, like, and so when you're talking about negotiating the different like the objectives, and then, giving them time to think about stuff, which does not happen in 15 minutes, and then assessing it. Like I actually did something recently where I just didn't even bother assessing it. I was like, you know what, if they know I exist, I feel like I've achieved my goal in the 10 minutes that I was given. So yes. Yeah. Like with this, what are the non-negotiables to try to make this work in like a mini session?
Yes. Yeah. So I definitely would focus on criteria for success. I think that's going to be the biggest thing that will be helpful to them, that they can take away and apply after you've talked to them. When they are in that database, when they're researching, they can kind of say, okay, I have reached this point, I'm doing good. And knowing you exist is a very big success point. I am loving all of the different database jargon options in the chat. Thank you all. Okay. And then so one thing that is the same with any kind of lesson planning, reflecting is very important. You know, grab your cup of tea, turn on some good music, pencil in some time on that very full calendar, and sit down and think about your lesson. Think about questions your students asked. Think about any time that you had some odd looks. And, you know, where was that? What were you talking about? How can you make that more transparent? If you can, wiggle your way into the LMS shells where the courses you're working on, and then you can clarify those things directly with the students. It's a lovely experience. You can just say, hi, here's this thing. And students are the best experts at whether the lesson is transparent. So, you know, in addition to watching them and talking to them, gather some kind of exit data if you can. Pop a QR code up on a screen with a quick survey. They all know what QR codes are. They will pull their phones out and you might actually get some participation. All right, so you've listened to me talk for long enough. Now it is your turn. So we're going to go into breakout rooms, and each room is going to be given a link to a Google Doc that has a sample lesson plan in it. So take a look at the lesson and think about ways you could tilt different aspects of it to make it more transparent for students and for you as the library instructor. Each room will have its own document, so please add comments, type in the document, whatever you all need to do. You're also welcome to just unmute, talk it out, share ideas. Whatever works best for each person in each room, this is your experience. I would like each room to designate 1 or 2 participants to share ideas with the larger group when we come back together. So go ahead and as soon as you're settled in your rooms, designate those people. Take about 5 or so minutes, discuss in your groups, and then we'll come back together. Thank you. All right. Welcome back, everybody. The link to the search. Oh, well, that's no good. I can post that activity. And I'll link it in the presentation. I'll send out a slide for that because it's pretty cool. I like that activity. All right. So representatives, speak up for your groups. Whoever wants to go first, unmute and chat. What did you like about the process? What did you dislike? How could you see applying it? What did you all talk about?
I think we were in group 1. Basically, we were a little bit confused. I mean, were we supposed to create an outline for that one shot, or were we supposed to be the student side and address it? So some of these questions we didn't get to.
That's fine. So the goal was kind of to look at the lesson plan and think about how to make it more transparent. So even if you were looking at it from the student side, that's perfectly fine. Because, you know, the students are going to be the ones looking at it and needing to see if it was transparent. So if you found anything that seemed unclear, you could talk about that, how you might clarify those things.
We left a lot on the plate for other people to contribute.
Yes. All right. Group 2 or 3? Explain jargon, the SIFT method. Yes. So that is something that definitely needs explained. You can't just walk in and go, hey, use the SIFT method on this article, because it's going to take me a second to think about what that acronym actually stands for right now. So yes, definitely explaining the jargon is one thing that this lesson plan needs. Anything else?
Group 3 to talk about expanding on the objectives a little to explain more of the why. So, like evaluating your sources. Why is that important? Why should you care about reputable sources? Like, what does that entail? So kind of expanding on that why, answering that why question.
Thank you. Yes. So definitely make your objectives very transparent for your students. That why is very important.
I would add,
Related to that, it looked like the goals could be restated as whys at very specific points throughout the lesson plan.
They could. Absolutely. Thank you. Nicole, were you?
thanks. We talked about also saying why we were having library instruction in the first place instead of just dropping it in.
Yes. Why are you in a different room, and who is this person, and what do they have to offer? Yes. And so why do you need to look at multiple sources? Yes. So this is something we definitely need to make very apparent to the students, because they'll find something that says what they need it to say and they're gone. And that's not great research. So yes, that is definitely where we hammer home evaluating and the SIFT method. Is SIFT jargon to how many of you all are familiar with SIFT? Yeah, so SIFT, Michael Caulfield, if you're interested, you can Google that. It's handy. Why start with the library's databases instead of just Google and Google Scholar? That's a good one. Yes. What's the difference? Especially just plain old Google. Okay. So in the interest,
consider taking a look at jargon. Is there anything you could use that is not jargon that would serve the same point, so that you can kind of eliminate the need to even have to address and explain that in the first place?
the SIFT method, something we've actually been looking at instead of, we've done SIFT, we've done the crap test, which they all giggle at. We're looking more into lateral reading and how to talk about that without calling it something. It's just kind of good practice. Oh, that's a good question. So why did I just ask you to do that? Very nice. How important to tilt is the upfront transparency? Well, it depends on, if you're doing something like that, then you may not need it to be upfront. You could do it on the back end, so long as at some point they understand, the why of what you're doing. Good question. Thank you. All right. So since we are running short on time, I'm going to show you all kind of, can you see my side-by-side Word documents? So here's the original lesson plan on the left. That's the one you all looked at, and that was my starting point. Thank you. And then on the right is the tilted plan. And this is kind of how I fleshed it out and made it a little more transparent for myself and for my students.
Do you print out this and give it to them, or do you put it
No.
on the guide, or?
No, this is just for me. This is just mine. I do show them like the purpose and skills and knowledge part. Most of this, I use these for talking points. I use these to remind myself of what I need to tell them about what we're doing.
What's wrong with just adding it? Do you have a LibGuide course page and adding it to that?
So I don't have course pages for all of the classes. My LibGuide, it's broken down into sections, like into different parts of the discipline. Some instructors have their own course guides. I mean, there wouldn't be anything wrong with that. This was just mostly, my own personal lesson plan to help me teach. And yes, I will share both of those documents. No problem at all. And And then to answer Carmen's question really quickly, because she asked one before we went into the breakout rooms, I have not tilted my LibGuides. So we are currently working on a LibGuides peer review process throughout our entire library. So as that comes more together, I'm going to be revising my guide. But thank you. It wouldn't hurt to tilt a guide. All right. Any last questions? All right, well, I will pop a link to the slides for this presentation and to these documents in the chat. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Kayla. That was fantastic. I know everybody really
you.
appreciates your wonderful presentation and
Thank you.
having the opportunity to understand this new method. As everybody may remember from the last session, this will be available if you signed up for this session and this afternoon. The videos will be made available to you so that you can review them and peruse them at will. Thanks to our committee, and I think Angel may pop in here in a moment. We can probably stop recording.